My fiancé slept with a stranger during our engagement party, so I ended everything quietly and watched as her perfect image crumbled around her. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I believed loyalty and trust were the foundation of any relationship. When I met Ava, I thought I'd finally found someone whose ambition matched my dedication, someone I could build a life with. She was magnetic confident in every room, effortlessly charming, always laughing with just the right tone, and yet there was this constant undertone of stress in her voice. She'd talk about her job like it was a battlefield, claiming she was underpaid, overworked, and stretched too thin. I listened, nodded, and assured her it would all be fine and I'd support her every step. I thought my financial help, planning the engagement party down to the smallest details, and handling most of the bills was proof that love was about sacrifice. Weeks of scouring venues, choosing decorations, and organizing guest lists consumed me, but I didn't mind. Every sleepless night, every extra paycheck spent, I convinced myself it was worth it. Love, to me, was measurable. Loyalty plus effort plus financial security. I believed that if I worked hard enough, she'd see it and trust me fully in return. But there were moments I noticed her subtle defensiveness. When I casually asked why she stayed up texting so late some nights, she would snap. "It's nothing, just work stuff. Stop worrying." I laughed it off, but her eyes flickered with something else in impatience. She didn't bother hiding from me. Ava's world extended far beyond just us. Her friends were flawless, always impeccably dressed, always perfectly poised. Her family, too, had this unspoken standard of what was acceptable. And I felt their judgment in quiet glances and raised eyebrows whenever I tried to contribute to the conversation. I wanted to fit in, to prove I was as capable and respectable as they expected. So I doubled down on being the responsible, steady partner by the end of each day. I'd sit back, exhausted but proud, convinced that my loyalty, hard work, and trustworthiness would cement our bond. I didn't see it yet, but the cracks were already forming, tiny, almost invisible, but they were there. And in the world Ava presented to everyone else. I had no idea how quickly those cracks could widen into a chasm. I spent months planning our engagement party, obsessively going over every detail, convinced that if I created the perfect night, everyone would see how serious and dedicated I was. From selecting the venue to coordinating flowers, table settings, and the catering, it felt like running a small company. I wanted both our families to be impressed, to feel proud of the life we were supposedly building together. My hands were sore from writing invitations, my phone buzzing constantly with confirmations, but I told myself it was worth it. Every late night of stress, every extra expense, every anxious conversation with vendors felt like proof that love could be crafted with effort. I was convinced that the night would reflect not just our engagement, but the devotion I'd shown Ava for years. The guests began arriving, and at first everything seemed perfect. The lights glowed softly over the flower arrangements, the music played just right, and the laughter of friends and family echoed around the room. But I noticed Ava was oddly distant. She laughed at jokes I didn't hear, leaned into conversations that didn't involve me, and subtly brushed past me more than usual. At first, I convinced myself it was just excitement, that she was charming everyone naturally. But then, I caught her eyes, lingering on a few acquaintances a little too long. A playful tilt of her head here, a laugh there, that made my stomach knot. I tried to brush it off as social charm, telling myself I was being paranoid, that she was just happy and in her element. Throughout the night, friends came up to me, telling me how lucky Ava was, how perfect everything looked, how proud she must be of you. Their praise fed my ego. My blind belief that my hard work and loyalty were enough to cement our relationship. Meanwhile, I noticed Ava slipping away multiple times, her phone in hand, muttering that she was checking work emails or confirming details. I smiled, trying to appear casual, but a tiny voice in my head whispered unease, though I immediately drowned it with rationalizations. Eventually, I raised my glass for the toast. Smiling across the room at our guests and at Ava, the room glowed in golden light. Laughter and music blending together, and I felt a swell of pride. In that moment, I believed the night was flawless, the culmination of all my effort and devotion. I had no idea that while I stood there feeling triumphant, the first real betrayal was already unfolding right under my nose as the evening progressed. I started noticing Ava slipping away more often than usual. She'd murmur something about checking on a vendor outside or making sure the catering got sorted, and I'd nod, trusting her entirely. At first, it seemed normal weddings and engagement parties always had moments like this, but soon the gaps between her returns felt longer, her excuses a little too vague. My stomach twisted occasionally, a tiny pang of unease, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, I had seen Ava handle events like this before. She was confident, efficient, and impossibly charming. Then came the whispers. A few guests commented about a handsome stranger Ava seemed particularly interested in, laughing a little too warmly at his jokes, leaning in just a touch too close during conversations. I laughed nervously along with them, trying to brush it off as harmless flirtation, telling myself, she's just being polite. She's not that kind of person, right? My pride in her brilliance and poise battled against the tiny voice of doubt, whispering at the edge of my thoughts. I wanted to trust her completely. I wanted to believe the bond we had was unshakable. Later, when I casually asked Ava about who she had been talking to outside, she stiffened, her eyes flickering for a moment, and muttered, "Oh, no one, just a friend from work." Her tone was clipped, just slightly defensive, and that unease that had been nudging me earlier grew sharper. I wanted to press, to dig, but something in me hesitated. Something told me to trust her explanation, to believe in her loyalty. My phone buzzed quietly in my pocket, and a friend's message popped up. "Is Ava's secret admirer at your party, or am I imagining things?" I laughed awkwardly and put the phone down, trying to dismiss it. I returned my focus to our guests, to the laughter, the music, the glint of light on the decorations I had painstakingly arranged. I reminded myself that this was supposed to be a celebration, a night of joy, and I tried to immerse in it fully. But even as I smiled, joked, and mingled, a small knot of doubt had taken root in my chest. Unbeknownst to me, the first act of real betrayal was already in motion, playing out quietly while I clung to trust. I was halfway through talking to one of Ava's friends when I caught a snippet of whispers drifting from across the room. "Did you see Ava and him heading toward the back?" Someone murmured, glancing nervously toward a private hallway near the service area. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze mid-smile. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just a private conversation. Work-related, harmless, but the nagging pit in my stomach refused to let me ignore it. Every rational thought I tried to cling to collided with instinct, screaming at me that something wasn't right. I swallowed hard, pretending to laugh at a joke, but my hands were clammy, my pulse racing. Then came the notifications. A few friends, unaware of my growing suspicion, started sending photos and subtle captions through social media. "Saw Ava getting cozy with some guy at the party, and is it me, or is she flirting a little too much?" Each ping tightened the knot in my chest. Confusion washed over me first. No, it can't be. She wouldn't. Would she? Then disbelief. Then panic. My pride, my belief in the trust we had built over months, started crumbling. I tried to ground myself in logic. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe it's innocent. Maybe I'm overreacting. But even as I whispered these reassurances to myself, I felt the undeniable twinge of dread. I wanted proof, undeniable evidence, something I could hold on to before confronting her. But I was terrified of what that proof might reveal. My mind raced with every possibility, worst-case scenarios flashing in rapid succession. I excused myself from my conversation, moving toward a quiet corner of the room where the lights were softer and the music muffled. I sank into a chair near the wall, phone in hand, pretending to scroll, heart hammering in my ears. The murmurs, the pings, the little pieces of evidence, they all added up. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself to imagine the possibility that my worst fears were true. The person I had trusted completely might be betraying me in real time. While I celebrated what I thought was our perfect engagement, my phone buzzed again, and this time I knew instinctively I couldn't ignore it. I opened the message, and my stomach dropped. There they were, Ava and the stranger, locked in an intimate embrace behind the venue. Stolen photos from someone sneaky enough to capture them without being noticed. My hands shook as I scrolled through each picture, every image a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. I could feel my blood pressure spike, my vision narrowing, my brain screaming, "No, no, no. This can't be real." Anger hit first, sharp and searing, followed by a wave of heartbreak I couldn't contain. Humiliation clawed at me as I realized how thoroughly I had been blind to the warning signs. Every late-night texting excuse, every unexplained disappearance, every defensiveness that I had brushed off, all of it suddenly made sense. I remembered the months of planning, the money I spent, the sleepless nights orchestrating a perfect engagement, all while she was betraying me right under my nose. The one-sidedness of my trust and sacrifice felt like a betrayal, not only of my heart, but of my sense of judgment. I glanced around the room. Guests laughed, mingled, complimented Ava on her charm, oblivious to the truth I now carried. My friends whispered about how cute she looked, how lucky I was, while I sat frozen, my mind racing with disbelief and fury. I realized that confronting her here, in front of everyone, would only give her the chance to weave another layer of lies, to preserve her image while shattering mine. So I did what my instincts told me. I left quietly. I slipped past guests, past laughter and music, and found a corner outside the main hall, phone still clutched in my trembling hand. I knew I needed to plan carefully, to think strategically, because this wasn't just about heartbreak, it was about exposing the truth without losing control. Tonight, I would not react. I would wait. And as I leaned against the wall, heart pounding, I knew the next moves I made would define everything. I stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the laughter, music, and clinking glasses behind. My heart still hammering in my chest. The weight of what I had just seen pressed down on me, but somehow, slipping away quietly, gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt all night. I didn't want a C-knot in front of friends, family, or anyone else, but I did want clarity, evidence, and a moment to breathe before I reacted. Each step away from the venue echoed in my mind, a rhythm of disbelief, rage, and a strange kind of relief. Rage for the betrayal, heartbreak for the trust shattered in an instant. And relief because I had taken the first step toward regaining control of a situation, spinning far beyond my expectations as I leaned against my car. Phone in hand, I replayed every interaction. Every subtle excuse Ava had made in the months leading up to tonight. The manipulative charm I had once adored now felt like a mask that hid months of deception. Her late-night texts, the evasive replies, the defensiveness whenever I asked simple questions, they weren't quirks. They were patterns I'd ignored because I wanted to believe the best in her. That realization stung worse than any image or message. I had allowed myself to be blind to obvious warning signs in the name of love. Meanwhile, inside the venue, Ava laughed, smiled, and posed for photos, her flawless facade untouched by the truth I carried. The dissonance between her public persona and private betrayal was nauseating. I knew that exposing her impulsively would only allow her to manipulate the narrative, so I resolved to act carefully, with precision, protecting both myself and my reputation. I started formulating a plan, not revenge fueled by emotion, but a controlled strategy that would reveal the truth on my terms. For the first time all night, I felt a flicker of empowerment. Calmness settled over me, a quiet confidence that I could navigate this, that I could reclaim control without losing myself. Confrontation wasn't immediate, but it would come, and when it did, it would be measured, deliberate, and decisive. I drew in a deep breath, letting the night air wash over me. Feeling more composed than I had all evening, I spent the next morning replaying every conversation, every little excuse Ava had given me, and suddenly months of subtle manipulation became crystal clear. The evasive texts, the defensiveness over minor questions, the sudden urgent work disappearances, they weren't quirks or harmless stress. They were carefully constructed lies. My stomach churned as I connected the dots, realizing just how expertly she had maintained her image while bending reality around her own agenda. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a masterclass in deceit. I had been blind to because I wanted to trust her so badly. I reached out to a couple of trusted friends, careful to share only enough to gauge reactions without revealing everything. Their responses were subtle but telling, shocked, sympathetic, and quietly concerned. I could sense their minds racing, putting pieces together that I had already aligned. Meanwhile, Ava seemed oblivious. At brunch the next day, she couldn't stop boasting about how perfect our relationship was, how lucky I was, and how excited she was for the future. Watching her, I felt a sharp, almost ironic sting. Here she was, parading perfection, While I already knew the truth, I considered the options: confront her immediately, make a scene, and risk public drama. Or wait, let her facade crumble naturally while I stayed composed. The social fallout was mine to control, and for the first time, I understood that timing mattered more than immediate satisfaction. The sadness of lost trust weighed heavily on me, but it was tempered by clarity. I had boundaries now, and no charm or manipulation could erase the lessons I had learned. By the end of the day, I had made a decision. I would act strategically, not emotionally. Every move from here on out would be calculated, a balance between truth and patience. I felt a strange calmness, a sense of control returning, and even a hint of satisfaction that the next chapter wasn't reactive, it was deliberate. I didn't know exactly how the fallout would unfold, but I knew I was ready to navigate it on my terms. I started cutting back communication with Ava subtly, replying slower, keeping messages short, and avoiding unnecessary calls. At first, she seemed confused, a small frown crossing her face whenever I didn't respond immediately. I could sense her calculating, trying to figure out why I wasn't as attentive, wondering if she still held the same leverage over me she had for months. Her attempts to charm me back, flirtatious comments, playful teasing, even vague apologies for past behavior were transparent, and I ignored them all. Occasionally, she would drop vague excuses about work, her friends, or errands, each one a thin veil over her growing frustration. Watching her scramble to maintain control, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Meanwhile, I began quietly gathering proof screenshots, timestamps, social media posts, and messages from friends, anything that could verify the betrayal without alerting her. I had to be meticulous, careful not to leave a trace that would tip her off. Friends and family continued praising Ava, oblivious to the storm brewing behind the facade. "She's so charming," they'd say. "You're so lucky to have her." Their words were like salt on an open wound, a constant reminder of the contrast between perception and reality. Small moments of tension started to emerge. Ava occasionally gave me a lingering look, her smile forced, and I could sense suspicion simmering beneath the surface. Did she know I knew? Was she trying to test me, to see if her manipulation still worked? Those glances only strengthened my resolve. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. By the end of each day, I felt a quiet, steady calm. The power had shifted subtly, was no longer the one being manipulated. I had control of my emotions, my social narrative, and the truth. And while the world still saw a perfect engagement, I knew the reckoning was coming. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy, and I was ready for the moment when everything would unfold on my terms. I overheard it by accident. A snippet of conversation that made my stomach twist. Ava was talking to some of our mutual friends, subtly planting little doubts about me, how I was too controlling, overly sensitive, or making her life miserable. The betrayal I already felt was now compounded by the sting of public humiliation. Every fiber of my being ached as I realized that, to everyone else, I looked like the bad guy while she maintained her flawless image. I sank into a chair alone later, replaying the moments that had led here, trying to make sense of it all. How had love, what I thought was mutual respect, trust, and loyalty, turned so toxic? The depth of her deceit hit me like a punch to the chest, leaving me breathless. I remembered her charm, her flattery, the promises she made, all of it now a web of manipulation I had blindly walked into. I had trusted someone so completely, only to find that trust used as a tool against me. The worst part was her perfect social facade. Laughing, smiling, posing for photos, everyone around her oblivious to the reality. She looked untouchable, untarnished, untouchably beautiful in everyone's eyes, and for a moment I felt powerless. It was as if the world itself was siding with her, leaving me isolated with my anger, sadness, and disbelief. But in that humiliation, a spark ignited. I realized I didn't have to react emotionally. I could plan, act, and execute a response that was controlled, impactful, and precise. I promised myself that the next move would not be rash, not impulsive, but deliberate, something that would leave no doubt about the truth. As I clenched my fists and stared out the window, I knew the reckoning was coming. When it did, it would be irreversible, and this time, I would be the one holding the power. I decided it was time. Quietly, carefully, I began sharing the evidence I had gathered with a few mutual friends and family members. one message at a time. Screenshots, timestamps, social media posts, so pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture Ava couldn't deny. I made sure to stay calm, measured, and factual, narrating my experience without anger or dramatics, because I knew any hint of emotion could be twisted against me. The reaction was instantaneous. Friends gasped, eyes widened, whispers spread like wildfire, and suddenly everyone who had once praised her charm started questioning it. The gossip that followed was rapid and relentless, leaving Ava in the center of a storm she had never anticipated. Her perfect image, the poised, flawless, untouchable facade, crumbled in real time, exposing vulnerability she had carefully hidden for months. I watched her face shift through disbelief, panic, and anger as reality sank in. Through it all, I remained calm, narrating quietly to those around me what had actually happened, making sure no exaggeration or dramatization colored the truth. I could see the difference between perception and reality in the eyes of our friends and family. Questions began to surface. Did she really do this? How could she hide it so well? The contrast between the Ava everyone knew and the Ava who betrayed me was impossible to ignore. By the end of the evening, I felt a complex mix of vindication and exhaustion. The betrayal had been revealed, her manipulations laid bare, and the social power she once held over everyone, including me, had shifted. I was vindicated, but emotionally drained. The fight hadn't been over just yet, and the final closure still lingered on the horizon. For the first time in weeks, though, I felt a glimmer of control, and it was intoxicating. Ava tried desperately to explain herself, spinning half-truths and excuses that sounded rehearsed, but no one seemed to believe her anymore. Friends who had once gushed over her charm now whispered behind her back, keeping their distance. Her social circle, once a shield that protected her image, became a cage, gossiping about every interaction, dissecting every lie. Even family members who had admired her suddenly questioned her character, their trust evaporating with each revelation. I watched from a distance as her poise faltered, the confident smiles replaced by tight lips and forced laughs. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation from me, just quiet observation. And yet, the effect was undeniable. The betrayal she had meticulously hidden began to unravel on its own, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. It was strangely satisfying to see the consequences of her actions unfold naturally, each reaction confirming what I had already known. Manipulation only works as long as no one knows the truth. My quiet approach had given her no opportunity to spin the narrative in her favor. Sitting in the corner of that social storm, I reflected on the lessons this betrayal had forced upon me. Trust is precious, boundaries are essential, and the red flags you ignore early will only grow sharper with time. I realized how important it is to value self-respect over appearances, and that patience and strategy could sometimes accomplish far more than impulsive action. By the time the evening ended, I felt a sense of empowerment creeping back in. Ava's world, once seemingly untouchable, was now fragile. A reminder that control lies not in charm or deceit, but in integrity and composure. I was ready to reclaim my life, to rebuild without her manipulation shadowing my every step. For the first time in weeks, I felt free and capable of moving forward on my own terms. I formally ended the engagement with Ava a few days later, keeping the conversation calm and deliberate. I made it clear that communication would be minimal going forward, setting boundaries that ensured she could no longer manipulate or influence my life. There was no shouting, no accusations, just clarity. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of her deceit lift slightly, replaced by a sense of control over my own narrative. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself. Friends became a pillar of support, reminding me of my worth beyond any relationship or betrayal. I poured energy into personal growth, hobbies I had neglected, and the things that genuinely made me happy. Each day, I felt the heartbreak transform no longer a raw, painful ache, but a lens through which I could understand my boundaries, my limits, and The lessons were painful, but they were invaluable. Emotionally, I began to heal. What once felt like crushing betrayal became clarity, independence, and a newfound confidence. I recognized the patterns that had allowed manipulation to thrive, and I promised myself I would never ignore the signs again. Life felt lighter, freer, as though the air I had been holding for months was finally released. I even caught myself imagining the future with a quiet excitement, a hint of possibility for love or opportunity that felt safe, genuine, and unmanipulated. I knew now that empowerment didn't come from revenge or public spectacle. It came from patience, awareness, and strategic action. Sitting in my living room one evening, reflecting on everything, I realized something fundamental. Sometimes the strongest victories aren't loud, they're quiet, deliberate, and executed with unwavering clarity. That quiet strength, I decided, would guide me from here on out.